Thank you for joining us. I am Drew Armstrong, the executive editor of Endpoints News, and welcome to Post Talk Live. Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Drew Armstrong. I'm the executive editor of Endpoints News. It's Friday, May 15th, the day after our summit in New York with our partners, the Financial Times. It has been a crazy week. Marty Makary resigned as the FDA commissioner on Tuesday after a turbulent tenure at the head of the agency and days after reports that Trump was planning to fire him. Makary was scheduled to sit down with our senior reporter, Max Bayer, yesterday at the summit in New York, which we have been looking forward to for many weeks. But for obvious reasons, he pulled out at the last minute. So instead, I sat down with Max, Endpoint's deputy editor Lydia Ramsey-Flanzer, and the FT's U.S. Pharma correspondent Patrick Temple-West to talk about Makary, his tenure, his downfall, and where the FDA goes from here. Now, for those of you who couldn't join us yesterday in New York, and next year you absolutely should, you're still in luck. We're going to replay that conversation here. Thanks for listening and for watching.
I know it's the last session of the day, so hopefully it's a fun one. You know everyone up here already, yeah? We've got Patrick, Max, and Drew. We were supposed to have Marty Makary, the FDA commissioner, but he resigned on Tuesday, so you get us instead. And our plan is to talk about that. So let's just jump right in. Drew, I'm going to have you answer this
Sure.
one, because otherwise I feel like, Max, you're going to go down a really deep rabbit hole. What happened?
I think the inevitable.
Yeah.
I have the benefit of doing the obnoxious thing, which is being able to quote myself on stage, because I wrote a column about this yesterday that we published, and I think it was described it as an impossible job badly done. Just, when someone, I didn't write that just because he canceled on us, but I did truly believe it. No, I mean, I think, the way that it has felt this entire time is that the job of the FDA commissioner was always going to be one when you put it in the context of what the White House needed, what the FDA's role is, what the HHS department under RFK and the MAHA movement, looks like, where it was going to be perpetually full of these really horrific contradictions, where you have a HHS secretary who's insistent on getting contaminants out of the food supply and protecting children, and a president who wants to approve mango-flavored vapes. You have a deep distrust of vaccine policy, leading to a lot of skepticism of technology like mRNA at a time when, as we've heard today, competition in China is embracing every possible drug development technology out there. I mean, I think you see just these unbelievable structural contradictions that would have made it very difficult for anybody to navigate. And then an FDA commissioner who made a lot of choices in hiring and executing of the job that I think, whether it be, I think, Vinay Prasad, like a one-man negative headline machine, announcing large numbers of policies that a lot of people in industry were very excited about, but not actually turning those things into regulation that people could use. I think that's a recipe for doom. And we're heading into a midterm election. Bad headlines are unacceptable. Pissing off voter blocs is unacceptable. And I think, of everybody in the kind of health apparatus of the Trump administration, he both seemed the most high profile and the weakest. And so just inevitably, and combine it with the Wall Street Journal campaign to, get rid of him. It just, it's a pretty toxic brew. So surprised he lasted as long as he did, in all honesty. I wanted him to last until tomorrow.
Yeah, it could have been. I had visions of him realizing what was about to happen on stage. Could have been interesting. Patrick, from your perspective, what was the final straw?
mifepristone.
Here's mifepristone.
I think the vapes was an issue, but the constituency for that is so small. The abortion, I mean, this is state of play in the United States, and it's been like this for decades. The abortion constituency, the pro-life constituency, I should say, is very strong. And they started to go after Makary. They started to go after Trump because of Makary. There was a question about whether Makary was delaying doing anything more about what the FDA can on mifepristone on behalf of the White House, which it's a touchy subject for them going into the midterms. Ultimately, it just the snowball got out of control, and Makary had to go. I do think, to Drew's point, like this has been an ongoing, issue for him going back to Pazder, and that this ultimately, he became the fall guy. But I think what, ultimately forced him to resign was the abortion and pro-life constituency.
Max, what's your reaction to that?
I think that's pretty accurate. I was speaking with a administration official sort of afterwards, and we were kind of bantering about it. And I mean, if the pro-life movement, if their end goal is for mifepristone to be pulled from the market, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's just going to be a fight that everyone has to pull. Maybe the REMS change, which is, for those who have not been following it, it's sort of a more lenient dispensing requirement for mifepristone that happened during the pandemic because people were not going into doctors' offices, and it was maintained and solidified through FDA regs in 2023. And so that has pissed off all the conservative states who say, well, because of this rule and regulation, our more stringent abortion policy is now being usurped by any person's ability to get an abortion pill mailed to them. Okay, so that's now at the Supreme Court's desk. But you will have some contingencies of the abortion movement who want it pulled from the market, and then that is opening a whole other can of worms at the biotech industry, particularly the biotech sisterhood, which is a growingly powerful cohort within biotech regulatory policy that would say absolutely not, and it sets a horrible precedent for any state to get any drug pulled off the market for reasons that it deems to be unethical, which I think we can all see why that's a bad thing. I'll just add one more thing to Makary's downfall, and this was also part of a conversation I had with this person, was like, from the jump, and this relates to Vinay a lot of it, is he pissed off all of the people who he is the leader of. So it was political blocks, but I haven't been doing this job that long, but the FDA does not leak like the FDA has leaked in the last year. Not at all. I couldn't get a spokesperson to give me a 3-minute heads up on a new COVID vaccine variant. It never worked like this. And so to have the number of leaks coming out of this agency, I mean, it's kind of obvious to say out loud, but it speaks volumes to the degree that this rank and file staff did not like this guy.
Max, I think, does bring up a very indicative point. And, I think I have been doing this for a while. And I think one of the great truisms is that when institutions or companies fall into turmoil or are kind of in their terminal state of decline, I mean, this was the case covering Valiant and places like this, people just start talking. And I think the volume of dissatisfaction, and we've seen this across journalism, I mean, people raising very, very, very serious issues, up through, gossipy, complaints. I mean, I think it is indicative of a level of staff revolt that you rarely see outside of places where people at the top have really lost control and trust.
Totally.
To your credit, you have held the job longer than Makary did, so.
Yeah, I did. So did the head of the Office of Vaccines Research, which shocks me. I was just thinking about that. I was like, wow, if I would not have told you that he lasted longer than Marty Makary did, but he did with an FDA.
One of the things I've been asking you two about, and Patrick, I'd be curious to get your perspective on this too, is Makary's legacy. He had these commissioner review vouchers. He had all these ideas, and I think you read about this too, that it was a lot of announcements and it wasn't so much policy. But what is, if you could list it out, is it a hand's worth? Is it many? What is his legacy? What will we be talking about in 5 years that Makary was able to do?
I think, to be a bit sympathetic, I think that there are a lot of things that he started and talked about some much needed evolution of the agency to speed up trials, to compete better on a global stage, that if someone who is capable of picking those things up, getting the staff working in the same direction, and actually executing on those does, I mean, part of his legacy will be that he started some stuff that that someone else might finish very effectively. And I talked to a ton of people, big pharma CEOs, biotech CEOs. There's a lot of support for the idea of many of the actions that he was proposing. And so I think when you look at where I think smart people who deal with the industry, we're in a lot of broad agreement. If those things get picked up by someone who is able to get the agency working in an effective way, that's actually a pretty good legacy to leave. I mean, I think a lot of commissioners probably would have hoped that they could have been the ones to carry that through. But it's not necessarily, it won't be, I think, I know he's been called kind of the worst commissioner in FDA history, and I don't necessarily disagree, sorry, this century, but I don't necessarily disagree with that assessment, but I do think it's simplistic and incomplete. And I think it assigns far too much credit that I'm a big believer that, I'm not a believer in the great man theory of history. And so I think that the institution's legacy, if someone picks this up, will be a time of much needed change and adaptation, both in technology and competition, and how we regulate drugs, and how that affects the biotech and pharma industry.
Yeah, Patrick, what's your perspective on this?
I think there's some open questions about what remains of his legacy. The commissioner's priority review vouchers. I mean, I don't know what you guys have been hearing, but are those going to stick around? I think just the increasing politicization of the FDA. I mean, both from the vapes and the psychedelics announcement, the fact that you can just message Trump and get FDA approval in days is it's an independent agency. I mean, the president gets to pick the head of it, but it's regulated by Congress. So that's going to be an issue for whomever takes over the job next.
Yeah, on that topic, do you guys think the politicization ends here? Does it continue on? I've been wondering if Makary is going to be the exception or the rule. What's your perspective on that, Max?
I think time will tell, and that's, I think, sort of the scary part. Can you put the genie back in the bottle of influence if you aren't happy with the decision that comes to you? And again, I do think that comes back to sort of the career level reviewers sort of trusting you and having faith, and there being sort of that regaining of trust. But it's hard to say. I mean, we'll see who ultimately is named as a permanent replacement. I think the interim Kyle Diamantis right now is in pretty good standing. Obviously, he sort of has the benefit of being the face of one of the more popular initiatives, both within MAHA and within the general public. So he's sort of the face of bipartisanship, which fair enough. But it's we'll see. I mean, I guess it's hard for me to answer because I'm kind of now I'm personally interested to see 5 years down the line, are we going to see another slew of Wall Street Journal editorials for companies that have a rejected drug? And I don't know, and that's not any one statement about any company. But is that going to be a new norm where you are lobbying the White House on behalf of your applications? That's a dangerous world.
I think it's, I mean, I will say, I think we, there's a lot of us who, in this moment maybe imagine that there's some, idealized FDA sitting out there, perfectly immune from politics and, so on and so forth. And I just don't think that's the case. I mean, I think that, it's impossible to disentangle, in a two-party electoral system where, you have elected officials. I think it's impossible to disentangle the policy and the politics. I think it got to a particularly volatile and obvious point, and some of the people and policies around Prasad and Doge and all these things I think have surfaced it. And I am a believer that norm busting is kind of a one-way street. But I do think that I don't think we ever really had a politics-free FDA. If you look at some of the lobbying around certain drugs that happened in previous administrations, and it was quite effective in some cases. And so I think it's illusory to imagine that we will return to something that never existed. I do think that there's a huge amount invested, and people have talked about this a lot today, in just from a this is a cornerstone industry of the United States, and you have a gold standard regulator. I think there's an enormous desire to return to stability and consistency in order to help Americans get access to safe and effective therapies, to work with an industry that needs a very good and steady regulator to do that, and compete both on a national security basis and an industry basis against the rest of the world. I think there are a lot of economic incentives to return to that place and policy incentives to return to that place, not necessarily political incentives to return to that place.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, broadening it out a little bit, we've talked a lot about the White House, but in my head there's this, I'm wondering where the RFK Jr. is in all this. We've got, coming up into the midterms, he seems to have taken on a different role, and we're hearing more about one thing and less maybe about his anti-vaccine rhetoric. What, if anything, does Makary resigning mean in this MAGA split? That's an open question.
Max knows this space, but I mean, you stare into the heart of darkness more than anybody else.
Well, I feel a couple of ways. When the admin started, I was sort of telling different sources in industry and otherwise that my perception of things was that people in like the health world and in the pharma world have actually two presidents. One is Trump, the other is RFK. And while they are often aligned, and I think like RFK is, has been relatively faithful as lauding the president at things, they have different goals and ambitions, and I think that's manifested. We have started to see these headlines percolate already where the White House would like RFK to do nothing and say nothing about vaccines, and yet some of that review and research and stifling is happening, and people are starting to talk about it, and I sort of wonder if we are about to return to a friction point. The other thing I'll say is we would be naive to think that, not to bring up the Wall Street Journal editorials again, but are those just Marty might be gone, and then I sort of wonder if RFK sort of returns to taking that place as a point of mainstream conservative critique, and how does that play in a midterm year? And RFK has the backing of a multi-million person sort of political movement that isn't going anywhere. Yes, they've been frustrated with him, but he has had long-term believers, and that gives him power, the likes of which Marty Makary never had. And so I think that's something that exists. But I still see a world in which RFK's power and influence is sort of diminishing, and at the very least, he is sort of gated in the admin. But time will tell to some degree.
It was very interesting to watch, biotech stocks in the moments after the news broke earlier this week, because you could kind of see the market thinking, oh, he's gone, this is great, and the biotech index was ticking up, and then I kind of imagined a lot of people realizing, wait, it could be someone even worse for us, and it kind of ticked back down, and and so I do think this question, in this very, very volatile politics right now, and in this these tension points between the MAHA movement and what the Trump administration currently needs electorally, and all the other the huge number of disparate groups that are going to be trying to weigh in on who gets picked here. And then there's the question of who can get confirmed by the Senate right now, which I think is its own challenge. I mean, it is just, there are a lot of questions about which direction this goes, and can they get quality people to do the job? I mean, I think we've seen cases where really good people, we have heard are up for jobs and then have said, no, not for me. And so I think there's, not only the question of who would they pick for the job, but also, will certain people say yes? Do people really want to say, sure, I'll step into this incredibly high-profile job, taking arrows from every single corner, preparing to get hauled before a Democratic Congress and answer every last one? I mean, that is not a great job to take right now.
Right.
Yeah. Patrick, what are you watching on this front?
I think you brought up the share price reaction, which was very funny on the day and on Friday, as well as this stuff was rumbling out. But the XBI, I mean, we've talked all day about this. The industry is really strong. Moderna's share price is up something it's one of the top performers in the S&P 500, which I wouldn't have expected this year. So there has been a lot of resiliency in the biotech industry, despite the chaos at FDA, despite the personnel turmoil. And I'm wondering how big of an impediment to continued progress, continued growth in biotech does the FDA continue to be for the companies that we've talked about, and could be for a host of others?
And just to be pragmatic here too, like I don't even know how many vaccine applications are going to come before the FDA between now and the end of the term. I mean, the biggest one we're watching, the biggest vaccine catalyst right now is, there's two. There's the Lyme vaccine for Pfizer, which is going to actually be a fascinating case because it narrowly missed on one of its secondary endpoints. And Lyme is a huge,
like the overlap there between
that's going to be a very interesting application to watch.
Yeah.
The other one is Moderna's norovirus vaccine, which I think we're still waiting for a phase 3 readout, but like, that's kind of it. There's these combo vaccines. So it's kind of like, I think like RFK, as we've learned, is sort of really centering on like what research could be done in the background, and I'm not trying to belittle what that could do to sort of faith in certain individual products or the stifling of research as researchers conclude it, but like, I'm not really sure exactly on a product level, the way we saw with the COVID vaccines and Moderna's flu vaccine are sort of like going to even come before the FDA between now and 2028.
Yeah. That brings perfect segue to my question of what the heck is in front of Alex, this new acting commissioner? Like I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking about the Peptides Advisory Committee and in July. I'm thinking about the psychedelic stuff that was just put into action. What is all on this acting commissioner's plate?
Peptides is a big one. I think, this is sort of a little off the beaten path for me, but like, I'm sure food, I'm guessing, I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing he's like retaining the like food chief title in the meantime. So whatever is to be done there, will there be more vapes approved? Yeah, I think you asked a great question, which is what happens to the CMPV program, which is when I speak to people in industry, it's described as a poison chalice, which is absolutely baffling of a description for something that theoretically should cut your review time down by like 6 months. And it's telling how unideal that has become, which is like, I don't know, it just speaks to the ineptitude of that program, frankly, and how politicized it's been. So I wonder how much that's still going to be wielded. That obviously works right in tandem with MFN, which is simultaneously feels like everyone is losing a little bit of steam. But I think that's the main question to me is, are we going to see more CMPVs? Oh, and China, like who takes the mantle on the China stuff? Is that him? Do they wait for another permanent person to come in? Is he involved in the hiring of a new permanent CBER head? So there's some personnel stuff, China and CMPVs.
Personnel stuff, that's right. I mean, he's got to name the CBER and CEDAR.
Totally.
CEDAR, is there an acting director?
Well, Tracy Beth Hogue is an interim,
Sure.
Yeah.
so I think we're sort of waiting to see if that holds. And
It's a lot of TBD positions.
it's a lot of TBD positions.
It's a lot. When does FDA get boring again?
Yeah.
I wonder if it will. What do you think, Patrick?
No, I just think the personnel issues. I mean, Kyle will have to at some point appoint CBER, CEDAR. Tobacco was vacant. Oncology was vacant.
Yeah. They just named a new permanent oncology head, I think, as the interim.
Yeah. But I think we don't know. I mean, I don't know. My working assumption is that none of this stuff gets filled until there's a new commissioner in place. And I think, as we've seen from CDC, that can take a really, just even naming a pick and, in Surgeon General, I mean, like, these have not been positions that have been rapidly nominated and processed and filled. I mean, this is things are not going great in terms of just the pipeline. I mean, especially where you have a Republican-controlled Senate, like you would think that this is something that would move relatively quickly. It just hasn't been the case in a lot of these roles.
Yeah.
It's not the same breakneck pace as the first 100 days.
No.
That is for sure.
Which I think is normal. I mean, I think, like you get, when a new administration comes in, you see kind of rapid, filling of these roles. They have a mandate to do so. But I think that just starts to get harder when the politics start to fracture and you have, lawmakers like Bill Cassidy, who's kind of, gotten fed up and has begun to kind of take his penalties, put the administration in the penalty box in a few places. And so I think the politics have just gotten a lot more complicated at a time when, the administration, or at least around the FDA, could use some really easy politics to work with.
Yeah. This might be a totally moot question to ask, but Max, I'm dying to know, what was like the one question you were really excited to ask Makary on stage?
are you getting fired?
Okay, beyond the obvious.
That would have been my first question.
Yeah,
so,
And for those of you who saw Max interview Callie Means last year, I can assure you that would have been Max's first question.
it was going to be my first question. No, I mean, I think like that, I mean, a lot of China stuff, but yeah, it would have been, or like pretty much like, are you fired? Like, it's like a graveyard.
Good man, yeah.
Yeah.
Energy.
One thing I want to say too about the regs, not to like bring up like a question like 3 questions ago, but like Makary's legacy, and I think it's fair to ding him for these pilots, but you got to remember too, and I don't know how much the admin is sort of like monitoring this goal of theirs, but far as I was aware, for every 1 new reg, you're cutting 10. So at the FDA, that's kind of like,
Feels like a century ago.
right? But like, so I wonder if, well, I also feel like that was a first term thing that they brought back for the second term, but it's all to say like, I'm trying to think like, why were there so many pilots? And maybe it was kind of for that reason. And I don't know if any new FDA person is going to be able to come in and quickly like more, like cement more, if they're actually holding commissioners or anybody to that, like, might be sort of the explanation for why we saw so many things that felt flimsy, is because to implement new federal, new guidelines through the Federal Register, you had to find gaps elsewhere. But maybe I'm grasping at straws.
No, that's a good point. It's a hard thing to be working against. Well, folks, we weren't Marty, but we did our best. I thank you all for joining
Maybe next
on
summit.
stage,
Thanks, everybody.
and thank you guys for this.
Welcome back. Thanks again for watching. And if you were in New York yesterday for the summit with our partners, the Financial Times, I hope you said hello. We're already starting to plan some of our next live events for later this year, including our AI Day in New York, our Health Tech event in New York, and God help us, JP Morgan. Now, if you've already signed up for the Post Talk newsletter, you'll get notifications when we have a new broadcast coming up. If you're not signed up, head over to endpoints.news in the top right-hand corner, hit the reader profile link, then preferences, and click to activate Post Talk. We're going to have a new way of signing up soon. It's going to be a little bit smoother. Can't wait. You can also follow us on X, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and Blue Sky by searching for Endpoints News. We'll have another Post Talk Live coming up the next time news breaks. I'm Drew Armstrong, and thanks for joining.